Hello, I'm Matthew Shribman, and my mission is to engage, enthuse, and empower through education. All around the world, people are disengaged from learning, and all too often, we've had our curiosity driven out of us by an outdated education system, and we find science inaccessible, maths too hard, poetry wasted time, and history boring. And what's worse is that many of us don't even have access to education that may or may not be interesting. And either way, all of us enter an enormously complex world that none of us could ever fully understand. And all of us, no matter how smart, inevitably make bad decisions. And these bad decisions can be as small as taking a disposable plastic cup or as large as billions of people taking disposable plastic cups, and as small as dropping a cigarette butt or as large as approving the destruction of a rainforest. But it's not just that we make bad decisions. We often don't seek to understand, or struggle to, amidst all the noise, how we could change the course of humanity for the better. And partly because of what we've learned or not learned, and partly because we live in a world whose primary and all too pervasive pursuit is profit for profit's sake, where many of the people in charge are so entrenched in business as usual that they can't even make space for improving the world. And so we misplace our time and our money and our desires in things that abuse the planet and the biosphere. And whilst this may not have been such a big problem a few hundred years ago, now there are 8 billion of us. We're on the brink of irreversible disaster, and civilization is at stake. I don't think many of the world's problems have simple solutions, but I do know this: the best solutions all begin with understanding, and our ability to understand is entirely shaped by what we know and what we learn, not just at school, but over the course of our entire lives. So this is what drives me every day. I am a science communicator, and I am the head teacher at AimHi. I want to teach, and I want to inspire people to change the world for the better. I want to help to build a future where everyone, regardless of their background, upbringing, location, age, has access to brilliant education. And because there's so much untapped brain power and so much unrealized potential, and I want to unleash it. Think of all the global problems that could be solved, of all the times in history we need people to be learning and to want to learn, because humanity might just depend on it. And this is why I'm very grateful to GreenFest for having invited me on to do this talk. This talk is going to be about the green recovery. What would a green recovery look like? And I'm also going to talk about some of the science around environmentalism and what's going wrong, and try to kind of turn that into what needs to change for the better. And so thank you all for coming. If you're on and you want to ask me questions on the go, then just go for it. I love questions on the go. As part of running AimHi, the school, I teach science and a bit of maths, but mainly like environmental science. Like, people are asking questions all the time. So I'm very happy to receive any questions as we go through, and I'll just steer things in a different direction depending on all of that. So I wanted to start kind of by showing you guys something. I'm just going to share the old screen so I can do it. Here we go. Share. So this here is a bunch of monkeys, and this bunch of monkeys have got a nice load of bananas in their enclosure. Oh, I can't spell. How do you spell bananas? I'm quite dyslexic, so my spelling might be repeatedly bad throughout all this. Anyway, so these monkeys are in an enclosure, and this is an experiment. It's not the nicest experiment, but it's an experiment that's really, really interesting. And I like to tell it at the beginning of talking about environmentalism in general, because it can teach us a lot about ourselves. So basically, let's go back to the old monkeys. So these monkeys are inside this enclosure, and in the middle of the enclosure, there's a ladder, and the ladder has got these delicious bananas at the top. And every day the bananas are replaced with fresh new bananas. And so every day the monkeys climb up and get the bananas. Anyway, the people doing the experiment then set up this kind of like perimeter around the ladder. And anytime a monkey crosses the perimeter, all across the enclosure, cold showers are activated, and all of the monkeys get covered in cold water, and they don't like it. And so they start attacking any monkey that goes close to the line And they're like, no, 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 get back and don't cross the line. So the monkeys kind of teach one another that nobody crosses the line. So every monkey learns that we do not go across this line, and that becomes part of the deal. Now the experimenters start to add new monkeys into the enclosure. This is not the greatest monkey, but it'll do because I'm rubbish at drawing too. So they start adding new monkeys into the enclosure, and the new monkeys have never experienced the cold showers. So to them, the idea of this cold shower thing is a mystery. But as soon as they try to climb the ladder to eat the bananas, the other monkeys attack them. And so they learn, do not climb the ladder to eat the bananas. They don't know why, but they know that it's against the rules. And so the experimenters then go on to replace all of the monkeys in the enclosure. So eventually, all of the original monkeys are gone, and they're all replaced with new, less well-formed, quite pixelated monkeys. And these new monkeys have never crossed the perimeter to the ladder. They all attack one another if they try to cross it, and they've never experienced the cold showers. So they don't climb the ladder, but they don't know why. Now, the experimenters then turn off the cold showers. And even though there is now no reason not to climb the ladder because the circumstances have changed, the monkeys don't climb it. And the reason why I kind of wanted to talk about this to begin with is because for me, this is an important idea about the problems that we have in the world at the moment, is that people think that we do things for very good reasons, and that the systems we have are the best systems, and that we've already created the best systems possible. But ultimately, there are loads of things that happen in the world that are based on actually very poor decisions that have happened in the past, or maybe good decisions that have happened in the past that have become ingrained and that now we should start to question. And ultimately, we now live on a planet where the biosphere is beginning to collapse. Well, I say beginning to collapse. We're in the middle of this disastrous sixth mass extinction, and incredibly rapidly increasing greenhouse gases. And we are, in many ways, very much like these monkeys who are refusing to cross to climb the ladder when actually our circumstances have completely changed. We have this problem of these ingrained habits, and we do things in the way that they've always been done because they have always been done in that way. But the world has changed a lot. Now, I kind of wanted to talk next. I'm gonna talk about a few different things here, but I kind of wanted to talk next about this whale. So does anyone have any idea what this whale might have to do with the fossil fuel industry? And if you haven't recognized it already, this is a sperm whale. It's one of my favorite whales. So the thing that it has to do with the fossil fuel industry is that the fossil fuel industry actually saved sperm whales. Sperm whales were quite on the brink of extinction. They're being hunted to extinction. And if it weren't for the fossil fuel industry, the sperm whales would probably all be gone by now. So that is one small thing that we have the fossil fuel industry to thank for. Now, I just wanted to start with one thing about the fossil fuel industry that's maybe a bit positive before we talk about how the fossil fuel industry is a total disaster that is bringing about the end. So this is in the I don't know if maybe you guys already know this, but in the head of a sperm whale is this large kind of cavity, which is filled with this material called spermaceti, which sounds like a kind of dense Italian pasta. And also it's probably got one T, but again, I'm quite dyslexic, so I can't spell things. But yeah, so this spermaceti is this incredible material inside the head of a sperm whale that helps them to navigate and communicate. Now, when this material was discovered by humans, we realized that it was the best substance we'd ever found in terms of burning with a clean flame and working as a lubricant. And that was one of the main reasons that sperm whales were so valuable and hunted so heavily, because this material, spermaceti, was in such high demand. And if it weren't for the fossil fuel industry refining a crude oil, then sperm whales would possibly have died out from overhunting. Also, there are some rumors that NASA continued using spermaceti long after it was forbidden globally to do so. But anyway, they're just rumors, and that's something interesting to look into. It's thought that they used it for the Apollo space programs, I think. But I have no actual proof of that. I just think that's quite an interesting story that they would carry on doing that. And I really hope that no one is using spermaceti anymore, because sperm whales are amazing and one of the best creatures that exists. Anyway, so as I'm sure everyone already knows who's watching this talk, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, problems with the world at the moment is that fossil fuel consumption is continuing to rise. We are continuing to burn fossil fuels, and as a consequence, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is continuing to go up. A lot of people think maybe it's starting to slow down in recent times, but no, the answer is no. The fossil fuel consumption is continuing to go up. One of the lies that we were repeatedly told, I think, over the past few decades was this idea that fossil fuels are running out. There is every year there's kind of a predicted amount of fossil fuels remaining in the crust of the Earth. I'm interested to know if anyone who's watching has any idea what the kind of percentage change is in that quantity every single year. How much do you reckon the amount of fossil fuels in the Earth changes every single year? So this is taking into account the fact that every year we discover a few fossil fuels, and every year we're continuing to use them faster than ever. So how many fossil fuels do you reckon are remaining? How do you think the amount of, well, let's just talk about crude oil remaining in the ground changes every single year? So it goes up by 2% every single year. The amount of crude oil in the ground goes up 2% every single year. So even though we're using crude oil faster and faster every single year, actually we're discovering it even faster than the rate at which we're using it. And so this is something that has us on a complete collision course with disaster, because there was a time when people thought, oh, maybe fossil fuels could run out fast enough to save us from the destruction that they could cause. But we no longer think that is the case. It's now very, very clear that fossil fuels are not going to run out. So next, I wanted to just talk to you guys about oh, I'm just hearing that there's actually a little bit of delay on the stream. So actually, when I ask questions, it seems that I'm not waiting long enough to hear what people think. Oh, well, I'll just ask a few questions, and I'm kind of interested to know what people think. But don't worry if you get a delay, because I shouldn't put long pauses in, because otherwise it'll drag on. And you don't want to hear my voice for too long. So I'll just carry on. Okay, so here's a picture of the Earth. And I'm just going to talk through a few bits of the science of what's going on with the planet that's particularly dangerous, before we talk about some of the things that have to change for the better. So everybody knows, of course, that the amount of greenhouse gases surrounding the Earth are increasing. Now, greenhouse gases are not a bad thing. Overall, we need greenhouse gases. If we didn't have any greenhouse gases surrounding the Earth would actually be far too cold for humans to inhabit it. So we need a level of greenhouse gas that's actually kind of reasonable. And I say reasonable, and that's kind of around maybe like 300 ppm or something like that. Anyway, we're now well above 400 ppm, and that's why the world is heating up. Another thing that's really important when explaining greenhouse gases to people is this idea that the problem is not that the greenhouse gases are high as such. The problem is that the level of greenhouse gases has been rising so quickly that the conditions on the Earth are changing so rapidly that life is not going to be able to keep up. And there are a few places where that's illustrated incredibly well, like the polar bears in the North Pole, obviously running out of hunting grounds and starving to death and kind of migrating into Norwegian islands and Canadian lands to try and steal farm animals and so on, because they just can't hunt anymore. And of course, this is completely widespread all around the world. We have mass die-offs of animals that are just and living things that are just not able to adapt fast enough. One of the things that is saddest, that I find saddest, and one of the best representations of this, is the beautiful baobab trees, the ones with the huge trunks in Africa that are now dying en masse because they can't keep up with the rate of change of the planet. So some of the things that are making this faster are, let's talk through some of the tipping points, which are particularly scary and worrying. And I know that I'm talking through some of the kind of scary things and the worrying things at the moment, but in a moment, I will talk about some of the things that we need to change for the better, and talk about how we can change things for the better and do so in time as well. So one of the things is water vapor. Water is now evaporating faster than it was doing a few decades or a few hundred years ago. And as a consequence, we now have more water vapor in the upper atmosphere. Water vapor is one of the strongest greenhouse gases. And because the equilibrium level of water vapor in the upper atmosphere is now higher than it was before, that is accelerating global warming. So that's one of the tipping points that will continue to accelerate the heating. The more it heats up, the more global warming there will be to continue things heating up. Another important factor is that as the sun's rays hit the North Pole and the South Pole, because it's white, they normally bounce off, because white's quite good at reflecting the sunlight. But of course, as this ice melts, the sunlight is hitting dark areas of ocean instead, and it's absorbing that heat. And so this is another thing that we would count as like a tipping point. So the world is going to continue heating up even faster as a consequence of the ice melting. So it's like the equivalent of the world taking off a white t-shirt and putting on a black t-shirt on its poles. So another key tipping point is that the permafrost that's melting in the north and the south is releasing huge amounts of methane. And methane, I'm just going to represent it with a chemical symbol, but it's just methane. So yeah, as methane is released, that is also one of the most powerful greenhouse gases that is of a relatively high concentration in the atmosphere. It's far more potent than carbon dioxide, even though it lasts for less time in the atmosphere. And so that is also accelerating the heating process. There are loads of other things happening, but I'm aware that I'm taking ages over this, so I'm just going to crack on. Like wetlands, large areas of wetland are beginning to dry out. And as they do so, they're also releasing methane, and they're releasing huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Similarly, forest fires are destroying the carbon stores of our great forests. And as they do so, they're also releasing carbon dioxide, which heats up the world even more, which results in even more dryness and even more forest fires. So the picture is really bad, because not only we can't just look at the trends that we see happening right now and extrapolate them kind of forwards and think, okay, well, it's been heating up this fast, so it'll probably continue at that rate, and that's how much time we have. No, we have far less time than that, because like one of the most common things that I see and my other scientist friends see coming out in publications is this really, really scary statement saying that the melting of polar ice, for example, is far faster than any of the models predicted a few years ago. And it's because of these tipping points which are continuing to accelerate things. And that is why the urgency to change things for the better is so great. I just quickly, while we're on this planet Earth, I wanted to tell you guys something really interesting about the weather, and why the weather has been so strange in the UK and indeed in other places all around the world recently. And I have kind of mixed feelings about the weather changing. I'm actually it's obviously scary that the weather is changing in a way that people who are old enough to remember how the weather used to be can kind of feel. It's a scary thing, but also in some ways it's a positive thing, because finally, it's something that people can't ignore because they can feel it. People can feel that the world is changing. And certainly, well, I'm in London at the moment. I'm not sure if anyone's watching from outside the UK, but London in particular, well, the UK in particular is going to be quite strangely affected by climate change, because while most of the world heats up, the UK will very possibly cool down as this nice warm Gulf Stream that usually kind of comes across from there and heats up the whole of Western Europe. It's thought that this will start migrating further south. It's already got about 15% weaker since the middle of the last century, and it's continuing to weaken. And as it does so, it continues to get pushed further south by currents coming from the north, which are like cold currents. So Europe, very strangely, might get colder, especially the UK, and that would be quite a scary thing. But anyway, so the weather, I wonder how many people have noticed, and there might be a bit of a delay on this, but I'm really keen to know how many of you guys who are watching this have noticed that the weather has been different. Do you think it's felt different, or do you think you haven't really noticed any kind of difference? And I'm wondering, if you haven't noticed any kind of difference, how old you are maybe too. The reason why it's been changing is this. So I'm just going to put some temperatures on here. They aren't necessarily accurate, but let's say that the temperature here is like 40 degrees around the equator. And let's say that the temperature up at the poles is like minus 20 degrees. Now, as the world heats up, the poles are heating up much faster than the equator is heating up. And so let's put the temperature up a little bit. So let's say that this 40 degrees goes up to 42 degrees. And let's say that this minus 20 goes up to minus 10. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I'm just trying to illustrate the point. So the difference between 40 degrees C and 20 degrees C is 60 degrees C. So before there was this temperature increase, there was 60-degree difference between the poles and the equator. And then as the temperature has increased even more, the difference has gone down to 52 degrees C. Now, why is this important? I'm not saying these are the actual temperature changes, but this is genuinely what's happening, that the poles are getting hotter quicker than the equator. And the consequence of this is that the temperature difference is going down. So the temperature difference between the poles and the equator is actually decreasing. And as it does so, the tension between the hot air from the equator and the cold air from the poles is decreasing as well. Now, what is this tension responsible for? This tension between hot air and cold air is responsible for the wind. And when the hot air meets the cold air, this is a bit of a cartoon, but in general, when the hot air meets the cold air and is swept sideways by the spinning of the Earth, that's what creates the wind currents that encircle the Earth. Now, we always talk about the westerly winds. That's because the winds almost always come from the west. But the winds are starting to slow down. The winds are starting to slow down. So winds that used to blow across the North Atlantic, bringing really consistent weather to the UK, have now started to slow down. And just like a river slowing down, instead of traveling straight towards the UK, like a fast river flows very straight. But instead of flowing very straight, the winds have started taking really bendy routes, just like a river slowing down. And as they do so, the weather is becoming quite strange in the UK. So if you might have heard this on the weather forecast, they call it an omega loop, just like the Greek letter omega, like that. And so if we end up with the winds wobbling above us, because the winds are going so slowly, as I said, they're starting to wobble like a river. If we end up with the winds above us, then that sucks up a lot of hot air from the equator, and we get extremely hot weather. And then the next day, these slow moving winds could suddenly, I wonder if I can get far enough back, these slow moving winds could suddenly flip around so that they're the other way. And that means that within the space of a few hours or a few days, we could suddenly have super cold Arctic air being sucked down. And that's why I remember last summer, July was insanely hot, and then August was really, really wet and rainy. And similarly, we've had quite a similar thing over the summer this year where it's kind of alternated between super hot and super cold because of this slow moving wind. That means that we've got this strange alternation in our weather. And this is caused by the world heating up. Okay, so I've just seen a question from Brian come in. Extremes have changed what sort of forage crops we can grow successfully for the cows to graze. Ooh, that, I don't know if that's a question, but yes, I agree. Like the extremes have started to change the kind of crops that can grow and that can survive. Certainly, people who are very good at watching natural signs and watching to see like when certain birds arrive, when certain leaves come out on trees and flowers come out and so on, have noticed that these things have been really off kilter and occurring really at very, very strange times indeed. Anyway, right, I wanted to talk next about some of the things that we can do to try to change this for the better. And first of all, I wanted to talk about farming. So here's a cow that's been shampooed, a nicely shampooed cow. And the reason I wanted to bring up a cow is because, have I got a picture of this somewhere? Oh, yeah. Okay, so the number of cows on Earth is absolutely mad. And when I say the number, maybe number is the wrong word. I don't necessarily mean number. I mean the kind of the mass of cows. Like if you were to put all the cows in a pile. So if you were to put all the world's land mammals into a pile, so by that I mean all the kind of giraffes and hyenas and mongooses and squirrels and all of them, if you were to put all the world's land mammals into a pile, then I'm going to show you the picture that it would create. Let me just bring it right up. 28% of the pile would be humans. I can't remember exactly what this is. Is it 42? I think it's about 42% of the pile would be cows. If you put it together with sheep, then over 50% of all the world's land mammals would be cows and sheep. And then we've got our other domesticated mammals. And then this is all the wild mammals put together. I've seen this number as sometimes put higher, sometimes put lower, but it's certainly below 10% of all the world's wild land. If you take all the world's land mammals, then fewer than 10% of, or less than 10% of that is wild animals. So that box contains all of your elephants and squirrels and foxes and everything. So most of the land mammals that occupy the world at the moment are cows and sheep, and then our other domesticated mammals, and obviously us. This is in terms of mass. Now, why is this happen, and why is this so bad? I mean, this has happened because cows are like this magic thing that can turn grass, which is something we can't do anything with. They can turn grass into loads of great products like milk and cheese, and historically, of course, well, not historically, currently, leather and power to pull plows, and obviously beef as well. So this is kind of going back to the monkeys that I was talking about before, about how we get these kind of ingrained normalities, things that we start to think are very normal, like, oh, let's cover the world in cows because cows are this great animal that can give us all this cool stuff just by eating grass. But they are from a world that is very different to the world of today. They are from a world where people really struggled for food and they really struggled for farming resources. And then they were an amazing animal for people to own, because they could create all of this stuff from seemingly nothing, just this seemingly useless grass. But now we're in a completely different world where 1/3 of all the food on the planet is wasted. 1/3 of all the food. We don't need to be using all this land to create food. And we certainly don't need to be using it for cows, because cows, as I was getting to, are I think it's about I've forgotten the exact numbers actually, which is such a shame. But anyway, I'm sure you've all seen this already. And also I began a campaign called, if you go on 0 and then beef.com, then it'll give you all the numbers. In fact, I'll write that out. 0, that's supposed to be a 0. I can't write. zero-beef.com, and it will explain all of the numbers quite nicely on there. But cows produce so much methane, and not only that, but one of the biggest factors that people don't think about so much is that they take up huge amounts of land, and this is often land that could be reforested or rewilded to store a huge amount more carbon. A future that is fit for a sustainable planet does not have farmed animals as a regular part of people's diets at all. And that might seem like an extreme thing to say for some people. So it might some people respond quite badly to that because animals have such a cultural place within our food systems. It's something that is so normalized for us to eat animals, and people have done so for many thousands of years. But we don't need to. We don't need to eat animals to survive. We don't need to eat animals to stay healthy. It's well-known fact that many of the Roman gladiators were entirely vegan. There was a time when the world's strongest man, I think, was a vegan as well. And look at all the muscle mass that a cow puts on. A cow is also vegan. We do not need to be eating huge amounts of meat or animal products to survive or to become strong. And it is one of the most effective positive things that you can do is to stop eating meat as much as possible, and animal products as much as possible, especially beef and especially lamb, because they not only release methane but also take up far more land than other animal products. Now, you might see this sometimes argued that chicken and pork take up about something like 5 or 6 times, they emit kind of 5 or 6 times less the equivalent carbon footprint compared to beef and lamb per kind of serving of protein. But that's because they're often factory farmed, and because they're factory farmed, then there is this huge impact of imported soy and other things that are imported to feed them. And where do these imports come from? They're often grown in areas that were previously very biodiverse rainforests, because they happen to be brilliant at growing the kind of grains that are especially good at helping to feed chickens and pigs and so on. That, I would say, is one of the, there's so many things that need to be factored into a green recovery. This is one of the things that's really important, is there is no magic bullet, and people often are looking for something akin to a magic bullet, and it just doesn't exist. There are so many things that we have to do in tandem together, but readdressing the way the land is used is one of the most important things. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about, and maybe I'll just go up here to this area here. The Sahara is expanding. The Sahara is expanding downwards, and as it does so, the people who live in these countries have kind of all banded together, and they've set up this project called the Great Green Wall. They're trying to build this huge forest across the middle to try to prevent the expansion of the Sahara, and it's extremely difficult and a very expensive project to do. But it's potentially the only hope of the people there, because the way we treat soil is a total disaster. Now, one of the key points that I wanted to get across today, of many different things that there are to talk about, is that we grow, at the moment, when we grow crops, we do so by thinking about what the plants need. We put the plants in the soil, this growth medium, and then we give them like fertilizers and things, and these chemical fertilizers give them like the phosphates they need, the nitrates they need, and the potassium, and so on. And we're like, well, that's fine now, because we've given the plants what they need and everything should be fine. And this is something I trained I studied chemistry at Oxford, and I kind of had I remember coming out of that course and thinking, right, I really understand chemistry. And I remember when I first heard about, not first heard about them, but first really looked into chemical fertilizers, I thought, well, that works, because, you've got the chemicals that are needed to feed to give the plant the nutrients it needs. But actually, it's so far off the mark, and you should not trust chemists to build solutions to biological problems. And ultimately, what we have only just begun to understand is how much life there is in the soil, and how much we are destroying the soil by putting these chemical fertilizers in. And in doing so, the soil degrades. And because we have these kind of monoculture fields full of crops that we're pouring all these chemical fertilizers onto, the soil degrades every single year because all the life in the soil is repeatedly destroyed. And it's not just the chemical fertilizers, it's the plowing as well, because the plowing that we do actually doesn't take into account the fact that to have healthy soil that lasts many, many generations, we need to allow the fungal networks to grow as well. And these fungi depend on growing these long strands that kind of connect them together over large distances. That's why there's big campaigns going on at the moment to have no-dig farming, to reduce the amount of digging in farming, and to use green fertilizers that basically trick the soil into thinking it's in a forest, rather than constantly throwing on all these chemicals that ultimately favor bacteria and favor weeds over the fungi, and create a huge imbalance that ultimately is very, very damaging. Soil is something that we need we need so much more attention paid to if we're going to turn things around. And that's the thing, like, I really don't want to come across as demonizing farmers, because it's not the fault of farmers. It's the fault of the education system, and a fault of kind of like political structures that should be there to like help guide farming in a positive direction that can create a sustainable future. Like I really, really believe in the story of farmers moving from, like, farmers are not the villains. Farmers could very much be the heroes of the climate crisis by absorbing almost all of the carbon dioxide that we've released into the atmosphere, just by really harnessing the soil and looking after. Peak farmers should be learning how to grow carbon in their soil. And there are methods developing out there, like the Ramiel chipped wood method, RCW, if anyone's a farmer and kind of wanting to look into this, which I know Tolhurst Organics are looking into a lot, is an amazing way of growing crops extremely effectively, large numbers of crops with very high yields, and doing so in such a way that's very, very positive for the soil. Also, just while we're talking about monoculture, I just think this is one of the big problems with the world in education. I'll come back to education in just a second. Education teaches, well, I say education, it's also culture. Culture teaches us that to succeed is to dominate. To succeed is to dominate and to take over everything. And it's so ridiculous, because when you look at nature, if something dominates everything, everything suffers, including the thing that dominated. You can see, as I was talking from a monoculture field, the crops ultimately will suffer in the long term from the fact that they have created, well, I say they have created, the farming methods have created this imbalance, and ultimately in the long term, everything suffers. And we shouldn't be being taught that domination is what success is. Success is about becoming a valued part of a community, just in the same way that it is in nature. And if you're building anything, whether it's like a business or any kind of project, I really hope that people will start to aim for becoming valued parts of their community rather than dominating, because to dominate is ultimately for everyone to lose in the long term. Anyway, so yes, looking at, so let's just go to this picture. I've got a couple more pictures I want to show everyone. Well, I wonder if anyone knows what this is. I'll just leave it up there for a second, just while I talk about soil. So the thing about soil is that it's a natural solution. Soil is already a living system, and one of the connections that a lot of people don't make enough, and it's something that people are increasingly learning, and I'm sure many people watching this know this very well. But the biodiversity crisis, so the loss of loads of nature, is completely linked to the climate crisis, because it's living systems that store most of the world's carbon. Most of the world's carbon are inside these living natural systems. As living systems degrade, that's when Yeah, as living systems degrade, they release loads and loads of carbon into the atmosphere, and it's very difficult to make living systems kind of come back to life. In fact, we often think that we can do so as humans, like help to like bring living systems back to life very, very rapidly in order to store carbon. So a good example of this is one of the ideas that came from the Center for Climate Repair and Sir David King. In fact, I don't know if the idea came from there, but it was something that they were looking into, which is fertilizing the ocean with iron. If you fertilize the ocean with iron, then it stimulates the growth of loads and loads of algae. And so you get these big algal blooms in the ocean. And the algal blooms are plants. And as a consequence, they photosynthesize and they pull down loads and loads of carbon dioxide. And everyone was like, right, well, that's a great climate solution. We just fill the ocean with iron, loads and loads of algae, sucks down all the carbon dioxide, everything's fine. And this is what you might call geoengineering. So you're trying to change the world on like on a global scale with these huge kind of engineering projects. And ultimately, this doesn't work. It doesn't work very well. And the reason is because it's kind of like human hubris. We're thinking, oh, we can engineer things. We can get the world to absorb loads more carbon. And ultimately, what really happens is that all of this algal bloom that we create completely disrupts the balance of nature in the water. And as a consequence of disrupting the balance of nature in the water, it might have a short-term effect of absorbing loads of carbon dioxide, but ultimately it kills off so much of the nature that in the long term, there's more death than there is life. And ultimately, the extra kind of death and decay releases more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than is stored. So this is, again, not a method that works. Just the thing that we keep finding over and over again is that we actually don't really have much power to force carbon dioxide into natural systems. The best thing we can possibly do, really, I mean, there are a few things we can do to gently help things to recover, but ultimately, one of the best things we can possibly do is just leave all of nature TF alone. We just need to leave it alone in order for it to recover. And it's mad to see so many things destroying the world. Even down, like ocean trawling is just one of the most insane things. I used to love eating fish, and I've eaten fish a couple of times recently, and I've just felt really guilty about it because so much of the fish that we eat is a consequence of ocean trawling, which is when huge nets are dragged across the bottom of the ocean, and they're like, oh, the bottom of the ocean, it's empty, so no one cares about it. So we'll just drag these nets across and we'll just trawl out everything that's there. And it's insane. The amount of nature that gets destroyed that just cannot recover. It takes many, many decades, if not hundreds of years for it to recover. It's mad. And also the coral that lives down here, the deep sea coral, has a beautiful name. It's called Lophelia. And our deep sea trawling is destroying it. And so that's another thing that has to be a part of a green recovery is not only an end to animal farming, at least factory farming, and very much so in terms of ruminants like beef and lamb, but also we need to stop this ridiculous fishing, especially the deep sea trawling. It should just all be illegal. If there was a sane government in charge, run by proper scientists, then just so much of this would be closed down so quickly. Anyway, here's another geoengineering project that's been proposed that I've been writing all over, that ultimately probably won't work very well. But it's something that's been proposed, and it's something that people are considering because people are starting to consider all options, because ultimately the problems are not slowing down. So this geoengineering solution involves taking loads of these kind of automated boats, like catamaran things, and putting them in the Arctic Ocean, and they suck up salt water and they use it to create salty clouds. These salty clouds, because they've got particles of salt in them, are even brighter white than normal clouds. And as a consequence, they can reflect the sunlight more than normal clouds, and try and keep out some of the heat, and try and make up for the fact that the Arctic ice has disappeared. And so instead of having these nice big white sheets over all of this, instead we can create these white clouds over the top. It's something that's being proposed, but it's kind of insane because it will radically change nature, and it almost certainly will result in unforeseen consequences, just like many of the geoengineering projects. Ultimately, the biologist's point of view is that we need to leave nature alone so that it can recover. and then it will be able to absorb so much of the carbon for us. There are so many things to talk about here, and I'm just completely running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of shift gear and talk about some of the, well, yeah, talk about, I want to talk about some of the things that are going on in government at the moment, and why they need to change. So, or in fact, first I'm going to talk about shifting goods. So at the moment, so many of our goods are like fast consumer goods, things that are made to be cheap and not last very long, things that are made to be disposable. People know about plastic being a problem in the ocean because we see these all these pictures of turtles that are trapped in plastic and birds regurgitating plastic and all this kind of really horrible, depressing stuff. But actually, it's so much worse than that, because one of the things that a lot of people don't know about plastic pollution is that the tiny pieces of plastic are perfect magnets for ocean pollutants. So all of the things that have been pouring into the ocean over the last few decades, like DDT and so on, cling to these bits of plastic incredibly quickly. It's unbelievable how quickly they find the pieces of microplastic and cling to them. You can put like a few microbeads of plastic into the ocean. Don't do that, but you can, into the ocean. And within a few hours, they will have concentrations of pollutants on their surface millions of times higher than the surrounding ocean. Now, these tiny pieces of microplastics then get eaten by ocean animals, that are eaten by other ocean animals, many of which end up being eaten by us. And so basically what we've created with plastic is this really mad system where we could barely have invented a better way of feeding all of the pollutants back to ourselves via these like incredible beads that like concentrate them in the food chain. It's mad. And also the ocean now continues to kind of grind up plastic as well into these like nanoplastics that are taking to the air, and now it's thought that we're breathing them all in. And in fact, London has one of the highest rates of nanoplastics in the world, which are we don't know the health effects of yet. We just know that we're breathing them in, and the research is just beginning into the health implications. So yes, some things that I wanted to talk about are in fact, well, let's just do some really quick quotes. So I've got some quotes here that I'm just going to tell you, which you may have already heard. So Professor James Hansen, former director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, says, "We are in a planetary emergency." Professor Hans Schellnhuber, who's founding director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, says, "Based on sober scientific analysis, we are deeply within a climate emergency state, but people are not aware of it." People are not aware of it. I imagine most people watching the stream are aware of it, but most people are not aware. And if they are aware, most of them are not aware at all of the extent of the danger. So Professor Johan Rockström says, "There is sufficient evidence to draw the most fundamental of conclusions. Now is the time to declare a state of planetary emergency. The point is not to admit defeat, but to match the risk with the necessary actions to protect the global commons for our own future." One of the other things that Johan Rockström has said recently is that the most likely trajectory that we're on, this is not a direct quote, this is just a paraphrase, but he's saying that the most likely trajectory that we are on at the moment is in line with with a world that could support less than half of the current human population, which is crazy. I mean, obviously the world has completely turned around for the coronavirus pandemic, and it's a very good thing that it has done so. But to put things into context, the coronavirus pandemic puts like a few % of the world population in danger, and obviously it's something worth acting over, certainly. But in comparison, we're talking about 50% of the world population with what's going on at the moment. And as Ban Ki-moon, former UN Secretary General, says, this is an emergency situation, and for emergency situations, we need emergency action. So I'm gonna talk to you I want to talk about some other things quickly, but I've just seen a question from Christian Adam. There are a few questions, actually. Let me take a few questions. So Christian Adam says, "For the sake of argument, would a vegan population require more land to grow crops than meat eating using battery farmed animals?" So yes, the answer is very much that Oh, no, sorry. I got the question the wrong way around. The answer is no. A vegan population would not require more land. Certainly not, because even if you factory farm animals, then yes, the factory farms take up a smaller amount of space. Huge sacrifice for the animals in terms of the awful conditions that they then spend their lives in. Which is like unbelievable when you start watching the videos of what the animals go through in factory farms. But ultimately, even in a factory farm, you still have to feed the animals. And where does the food come from? It comes from crops grown on large areas of land. And the thing about factory farms is that the animals in them are almost always fed on crops that are like we call them like human grade crops, as in they're quality crops that humans could eat themselves. And because of the way that biology works, by feeding these crops to animals, they waste most of the energy. And so normally it's like a rule of like 10% approximately. So if humans ate the crops, then you could feed, say, 100 humans. But if you fed the crops to the animals and then the humans ate those animals, then you could only feed 10 humans because of all the energy that's lost in the process of feeding the animals. So Brian's got another question saying, as a farmer, was chemistry-based arable, we saw the damage to soil by going organic and reducing animals, but grazing herbal grass. We have improved soil, surely less meat, milk, but better produced as first step. Okay, so Brian's talking about the fact that, so this is something I talk a lot about with friends who have I've studied this quite a lot, but I have friends who've really studied the kind of animal farming, beef, ruminant thing way more than me. And the conclusion that they keep coming back to me with is we shouldn't necessarily be thinking of removing animals completely from the farming process, because actually they can play a role in it. But the key thing is we shouldn't be selling them to be eaten, because as soon as we do so, we create a market, and the market creates a high level of demand that will continue to increase the amount of animal farming, and ultimately things will go completely off kilter. Instead, we should be thinking of animals as essentially providing a service to the land. So like animals like cows can graze on the land and help to cycle the nutrients and sometimes help to fertilize the land as well if it's done in the right way. But that should be seen as something that is supporting the growing of crops, rather than being a fundamental thing that we're doing just for the sake of growing the cows. So yes, if you were to support like more sustainable forms of dairy and beef and so on, I suppose you would be pushing things in the right direction. But also, it's better to just not consume those things at all. But it's a strange one, because if none of the population decided to support the farmers who were trying to do things more sustainably, then ultimately, like, those farmers would not be able to do so, and so it'd make it a lot harder for farmers to transition. Ultimately, though, the government has to step in and sort this out, because it's just too difficult to coordinate based on market forces, and it's very well understood that market forces are not going to save us in time. Okay, so wait, there are a few more questions, but before I go to them, I'm just gonna, I need to start racing through things, basically, because I'm gonna, right, I want to talk about fossil fuels quickly. So fossil fuel subsidies are increasing all around the world. The subsidies for fossil fuels are going up. So according to the IMF, fossil fuels account for about 85% of all global subsidies. 85% of all global subsidies are essentially going towards fossil fuels or subsidizing the negative impacts that fossil fuels have. 85%. And reducing these subsidies would have lowered global carbon emissions by 28% and fossil fuel air pollution deaths by 46%, and increased government revenue by about 3.8% of GDP. So not only is it extremely dangerous and damaging that we are continuing to subsidize fossil fuels so heavily in the world, but also it's just, there is no reason for it. It's making the whole world worse. And despite repeated pledges to end fossil fuel subsidies by 2025, governments from the 7 largest advanced economies in the world continue to provide at least $100 billion each year to support the production and consumption of oil, gas, and coal. Globally, these energy sources get more than $370 billion a year in support, compared with just $100 billion for renewable energy sources. So the largest the largest fossil fuel subsidizers are China, $1.4 trillion, and the US at $649 billion, and Russia at $551 billion. European Union subsidies are estimated to total about 55 billion euros annually, so a lot lower. But a report from the EU, from the European Commission in 2019, found that the UK was the biggest fossil fuel, has the biggest fossil fuel subsidies of the whole of the European Union. So yes, despite all of the problems as well, according to so Global Witness is a great charity, and they did a report in April last year about saying over the next decade, the global oil and gas industry are planning on spending a further 4.9 trillion on exploration and extraction. In September 2019, there was another report that revealed that global oil and gas companies have approved about $500 billion investment in major projects that undermine the climate targets of the Paris Agreement. And yeah, no major oil company is investing to support its goals of keeping a global warming well below 2 degrees and to pursue efforts to limit to a maximum of 1.5 degrees. None. Ultimately, if we are to transition to a green recovery, we need to completely change the relationship with fossil fuels, because the relationship at the moment is totally insane, and this needs to happen at a political level. It goes further, because it's not just about fossil fuel companies, it's about banks as well. So bank financing of fossil fuels has increased every year since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2016. The world's leading 35 investment banks have invested about $2.7 trillion in the fossil fuel industry since 2016. So JP Morgan Chase has been the largest of those, and they've spent about 220 billion on financial services for oil, gas, and coal. And Barclays and HSBC in the UK have spent about 158 billion pounds in fossil fuel industries since the Paris Agreement. And yeah, the three worst UK, basically the banks in all around the world are continuing to invest more and more in fossil fuels, which is insane. And not only does the UK emit more than twice as much per person than the global average, but Britain also ranks about 5th highest globally in terms of its historical emissions, because we started emitting so early. And in many ways, that means that we should be the ones who are reducing fastest. So this target of net zero by 2050 is nowhere near high enough, because it assumes that other countries all around the world will be able to do the same, and they won't. And also, we have a bigger slice of the pie, and so we need to be cutting things much faster. I used to think that I remember when I first heard the Extinction Rebellion proposal of net zero by 2025, I was like, oh, that's mad, we'll never be able to do it. But now I am totally behind it, because if we don't reduce to net zero by 2025, then we're just going to be far too late. And we'll be setting a global precedent that 2050 is reasonable, and it's just not. I don't know if you know, but the UK has recently approved plans to open a new coal mine as well in Cumbria that's going to produce 8.4 million tons of CO2 each year for about 50 years, which is insane. And also you've got HS2, the high-speed railway service, which I was quite confused about this to begin with, because I thought high-speed rail, surely that's good, helping to get more cars off the roads. But the way it's been designed is mad. It's the largest deforestation program since the First World War. It's going to destroy about 108 ancient woodlands, storing loads of carbon and loads of nature, and it will damage or destroy about 700 precious wildlife sites. And also the railway itself will emit huge amounts of carbon, both through its construction and its running. So yeah, even if we wanted to get to global net zero by 2050, we need to see an 8% reduction in global emissions every single year. And even that figure still relies on the use of negative emissions technologies. So like so carbon capture and storage that basically are not even developed anywhere near enough to work. You might see, one of the things that you see a lot in the world is people saying, oh, carbon capture and storage, it's gonna be enough to absorb all the carbon that's that's been released into the atmosphere, and it's just not. We haven't developed these technologies. They're not there. The idea that we can just like absorb all the carbon and store it underground, this is something that's peddled by fossil fuel lobbyists and so on, because it's convenient for them to say, oh, it doesn't matter that we keep emitting because we can just suck it down later. We don't have these technologies, and they are not being developed. So that's something that a load of the scientists I know are just like, how is this being peddled in the media as something that is a reasonable solution? Again, the only reasonable solution is to stop using fossil fuels and to restore nature. And that means to leave nature alone and stop doing things that damage nature, and reduce our impact on the environment by changing our diets, changing our relationship with the soil, changing our relationship with the oceans, changing our relationship with the way that we package foods, the way that we ship things around the world. There's so many things that need to change, and it all seems overwhelming, but that's because it feels like something that we have to do on an individual basis. And we don't have, it shouldn't be something on an individual basis. Yes, it's a good thing to be changing our personal lives to try and bring about the positive change that we want to see in the world. But it's not about us. It's about changing the system in which we reside to one that will actually create a planet that we and our children and our children's children can continue to exist upon. Because it's the system that is wrong. And what I mean by that is that the government is still governments all around the world still prioritize profit over nature. And as long as they do so, and as long as nature does not have a seat at every single boardroom table of every single major company in the world, things are not going to get better. Some companies are starting to say that nature is a member of their board and sits on it and is a stakeholder in all their decision making, but it's not happening anywhere near fast enough. And that's why Christiana Figueres, who is amazing, and I'm sure many of you have heard of her, writes in her new book, The Future We Choose, Surviving for the Climate Crisis. She says, it's time to participate in non-violent political movements wherever possible. And that's why if we're going to create a green recovery, we need to show the governments all around the world that there are votes in doing so. And the way that we do that is by speaking out loud and clear wherever we can and making it obvious that we will not stand for anything less than that. So I'm gonna stop there, but I just really quickly, because I promised to do so, I was gonna look at the competition that was the photo competition, and here we go. Let me drag on some of these pics. I'm just going to do so very, very quickly, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to announce the winner, but I'll just drag them on. These are some of the amazing photos that have been submitted to the GreenFest competition. So this is a red squirrel by Emma and a busy bee by Devon, age 11, both of which are so beautiful, especially the squirrel's eyes. I love that. And I'm so into bees. I've just been learning about how bees will all like crowd around one another in the winter months and like vibrate so that they can keep the queen above 30 degrees. Here is, so this is Charlie, age 14, has done My View, and Eloise, age 10, has done Friendly Horizon. Friendly Horizon is one that actually really makes me feel a lot, because this is a picture that I always thought of as being really beautiful, and I still kind of do as well. But I've started trying to convince myself to not see a picture like this as being so beautiful, just because it's kind of very monoculture and it's all the same. You know, these fields are being prepped for the same crops and plowed, and it's really weird that for me, because I agree with you, Eloise. Like it's a beautiful picture, but it's a really interesting like image as well about how our relationship with nature is actually quite strange, and how maybe we need to change them. Like a beautiful horizon will maybe become something that's more diverse and has loads of different things in it. But not to criticize the picture, because it's a great picture, but it just always makes me think that. Anyway, here are A Wandering Wood Ant by Anna and Bee Feasting on Passion by Grace, age 12, which are also great. I'd love to talk more about these because I love ants and bees, but I really need to finish because I've gone over time. And here are some Red and Green Oak Leaves by Heidi, age 5, and Charlie, age 9, has done Bug Hunts with Grandad. And also there is this incredible Little Yellow Mushroom by Peggy, age 7. and this great sunlight through the trees. Sunlight through the trees is so great. I used to sit out in the field at my parents' place and just like sit under a tree and just experience sunlight, and that is one of the best experiences in the world. Yes, I just wanted to say, because I think I'm allowed to say my favorite, and my favorite is Charlie, age 9, bug hunts with Grandad. I'm gonna have to, I kind of promised to do questions, but I'm actually gonna have to go because I was supposed to be at dinner with my girlfriend 4 minutes ago, so I've got to run. But if anyone wants to send questions, then please do send them to, well, please check out the school that I run. Here, let me bring it up. I can show you here. Oh, here we go. Let me show you. So this is, oh, it's gone all pixelated because I made it smaller. Where has it gone? Anyway, this is my online school. And if you want to send me questions, we've got loads of great teachers who'll be able to take questions as well. Then please go to AimHi. It's the nature first, curiosity powered, live interactive online school. Check it out and send any questions there. And we'll try and do lessons on them as well, because they're not just for kids, it's for adults as well. It's for anyone who wants to learn. So please come there if you'd like to ask questions, and I'll look forward to seeing anyone there and talking to you there. But yes, just a quick thank you to end to GreenFest and Vanessa as well for organising this. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm sorry that I have to dash. But have a great Saturday evening, everyone, and farewell. Goodbye.